Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon from wherever you're joining in. And welcome to One Click LCA and Foster & Partners webinar. And we're going to talk today about how EPD data helps architects, specifiers in their material selection process for big building projects. This webinar is brought to you by One Click LCA, and we have together with us Cinthia Espino Castillo from Foster & Partners joining us. Nice to have you aboard, Cinthia. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks for having me. Hi.
And Arturs Alsins, he's our own EPD expert from One Click LCA. Hello, Arturs.
Hi, happy to be here.
So for you that really need a repeat of the title of today's webinar is, how specifiers use EPD data to choose materials. And we will be also, after this discussion, giving you a short introduction of our new EPD Usage Analytics tool from One Click LCA. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later on. So, Cinthia and Arturs, would you like Cinthia to talk a little bit about yourself and what do you do at Foster & Partners?
Yes, hi. So I'm an associate partner at the Environmental Engineering Group here at Foster & Partners. I would say that my role is mostly focusing on whole life carbon, hence why we use the tool a lot, One Click, and the use of EPDs also. I also focus a lot on circularity and then overall sustainability strategies.
Thank you, Cinthia. Arturs, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your role?
Yeah, so I'm a senior product manager at One Click LCA. I'm looking after our manufacturing tools, so all the EPD generators, data integration, APIs, and such things. Yeah, been with the company for quite a while, and really exciting to talk about where we're taking our products in the future.
Thank you, Arturs. Yes, so why did we actually choose this subject today? There's a lot of discussion around sustainability in buildings and where EPDs and LCA kind of, what's the role in this whole discussion? And I thought that the best way to really bridge this gap of knowledge between manufacturers and AC professionals is to actually bring both together and discuss how EPDs and this data transparency that they provide helps AC professionals in doing better and more sustainable decisions for their bigger building projects. And thank you for joining us today, Cinthia. So today we're going to talk about why is material selection key to decarbonization of the built environment, and then Foster & Partners material selection process in building projects, where Cinthia is going to tell us about what to look for in EPD, which factors influence material selection, and why do we need more EPDs. Then at the end, there's going to be a short demo of the EPD Usage Analytics tool that is going to tell you a bit more about how you can then use your EPDs to track, analyze, and monitor the performance of your product EPDs and how this can help you and give you insights for your product. So, shall we begin? All right. So now I'm going to pass this over to Cinthia, and she's going to tell us a little bit more about their material selection process, and then we're going to kind of circle back into why this is very, very important, and this is key to decarbonizing the entire value construction chain.
Right. Thank you, Melina. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So I thought we would start first with understanding what we look for in an EPD. Right. So depending on the stage of the project, we might focus on different things as the EPDs might be used for different purposes. So at early design stage, so it might be that we want to create a carbon range to have a better understanding of what's going on in that location, for example, so trying to understand the industry a bit better, right? So we would look in this case for transparency first, so to ensure that we are comparing like-for-like materials. So anything that could give us a bit more insights into that material. So for example, say the recycled content of that product, or the end-of-life scenario, or the A1 extraction point, or the type of fuel or furnace that are used in the manufacturing process. So anything that could give us a bit more understanding of how this product is manufactured, then it'll enable us to have a carbon range of data points and EPDs that will look the same, right? Then we would look for, believe it or not, that they are in the right units. So for example, the amount of products that we found, like for example in EPDs, that we want to use, that we read the description and we think, oh, this is a great product, but then we don't have the right units for it. So because it might be that from the cost plan or from wherever we got the units from, they were just given in cubic meters or square meters or linear meters or by unit or by ton or kilograms. So anyway, if the EPD has conversion factors, then One Click will give us different units to input this material in. If not, then yeah, it might be that it was a great product. It was meeting kind of like the description that we were going for, but we can't use it because we don't have the right units. Then also I would say the region. So this is mainly when we're working in projects where there aren't many EPDs available in that location. So it might be that if there aren't many EPDs available from that particular country, so we end up using EPDs from other countries and then we localize them with the help of the tool. But then again, it might be that it's not representing the right situation of the industry in that particular location. So obviously having EPDs available from every location, then yeah, that's a win. Then as we move on in the design process, in the design stages, so for example, a detail stage, then it might be that we are already looking for products that have a low GWP, so low embodied carbon, so something that meets the specifications, for example, if they're already being written up, or an alternative product that we are proposing to the design team that kind of like meets the same specifications, but with a lower embodied carbon. So it might be that that's when we look at low carbon products. And then as we move on, then quantities is also an issue to discuss. This is particularly in our case for mega projects where the quantities that we're looking for example, for facade, glazing, etc. So we need to be able to specify products or to propose products that are going to be available in the right quantities and then in the right time frame, right? And then lastly, and this is maybe a more unusual item to discuss, but then lastly, and if you click to that last bubble, so that these are compliant with local codes. And I say it's a bit less usual because obviously you would expect that. I mean, typical materials are going to be compliant everywhere. But for example, while I was putting this presentation together, I was remembering this one project that I was working on last year, I think. And so basically it was, we were analyzing the concrete structure in a Middle East project, and we were trying to reduce the embedded carbon from it. And we were proposing maybe the inclusion of geopolymers within the concrete mix. Then by speaking with the structural engineer, and then later on it was confirmed also by the manufacturer, they said that, well, actually, this is still not code compliant in the Middle East, at least not for, not in this particular location, not for this particular element, so say the foundations, the structural frame. So we ended up just going for another alternative to reduce the carbon, the embodied carbon from the structure, but not as much as we would have gotten with the geopolymers. So yeah, that it's compliant with code. That's that's also an important but not as usual item. If you go to the next one. Right. So so I thought I would guide you through our EPD selection process. And if you go to the next one, thank you. So as mentioned before, so depending on the stage of the project, we might be looking for a carbon data range or for a particular product. But generally, our process would be something like this. So we first start with creating a pool of comparable materials or EPDs, or carbon data points. This is to, again, understand the big picture, right? So like, okay, what would be the carbon range for, say, glazing, concrete, steel, etc., in this particular location? So starting by creating a pool of EPDs from that location, or or something that represents the market. So if they have loads of import of that product, then we consider that mix. Then we move on to creating the carbon range by normalizing the input and create a carbon range, allowing for localization if needed. This is what I was mentioning before, that if we don't have enough EPDs for that particular location, so it might be that we take EPDs from other locations still that are comparable and that still meet the product specification, but it might be that we just need to adjust and localize it for this particular region. Then we move on to identifying any potential outliers. So we want to have a nice kind of like range that looks very homogeneous. So if we start picking on outliers that are at the far end or lower end of the range, then we want to investigate why there are those peaks, right? Whether it could be because the product is actually not comparable, as in like, oh, it turned up to be that this, I don't know, aluminum product was actually from virgin aluminum, let's say, and that's why it was giving us a higher carbon peak, for example, in our range, or because it's actually kind of like a variation that we need to consider within our range, and that's kind of like driving our insights on the manufacturing process for different products. And then lastly, so once we kind of like identify those outliers, then we can define our carbon range a bit better. And if it's at an early design stage, then fine, we have our carbon range, and then either we pick an average, or if it's a more detailed stage, then it might be that we are picking a particular product that it's comparing to the one that the architect shows, or we're just proposing an alternative. If we go to the next slide. Right, so I thought maybe I could give you an example of how we would do this, for example, in a facade. So let's say that these are our facade components. So we have steel frame, we have back panels, aluminum panels, insulation, and then our vision panel, so the double glaze unit. If we click next, yeah, if we go to the next slide. So we're going to focus mainly on glazing just for the purposes of this example. So for example, we know that in One Click, we can input glazing in different ways. So in One Click, you can find EPDs for curtain walls, all types. You can find also for insulated glazing units, but then of course you would need to input the framing separately, or you could even find EPDs for single panes, which again, then you would need to consider first the IGU process, which there are guidance for that, and then plus the framing, right? So if you go to the next one, right? So in our case, our preferred method is to input the two separately, the insulated glazing unit plus the framing, mainly because of something that we call internally the FMP factor, which is that in our facades, so typically the steel framing requirements would be higher than what you would typically find in curtain walls, in curtain wall EPDs. So we've done that exercise of seeing, well, what is a typical framing in a curtain wall EPD, and it wouldn't be really showing the design in most of our projects, the design intent. So that's why we end up inputting both separately. So anyway, if we go to the next one. So yeah, and I thought I could give maybe a quick overview of how we would use, for example, some of the one-click tools. So is it okay if I share my screen, Melina?
Yes, of course.
Okay, great. So let me share. Right, I think you can see it now. Okay, so basically for starters, and then again, I mean, the processes keep evolving, but right now what I'm at least trying to do is, for example, make use of the material compass tool, which I found it very, very useful. So basically, if we are looking, for example, at glazing products, then you could go into the glazing category, you could filter it out by the glass type that you're looking for. So for example, if we are looking for insulated glazed units, so I would just choose glass facades, obviously trying to filter out the curtain wall types. Let's say that we are looking for European products only, and Yeah, that's it. So if I am looking, for example, for double glazed units, so I would do something like this, and then I would start ticking off. I mean, obviously having a look at what the products say, but I would start ticking some of the products that I think would fit the description that I'm looking for, and then I would add them, for example, to a particular list. So in my case, I've already created, say, this double glazing unit list where I've already identified relevant products. And then once I have these, what I would do is export this list. So I think, for example, if I click here, so you could either compare them within the Material Compass tool, or you could then bring them to an LCA project, say, and that is basically what we do, for example, for when we are trying to compare different ranges. Let me stop sharing because yeah, that's where we go. And then maybe can you share the presentation again? Thanks. So then if you click on the next one, right, so then what we would end up doing is once that list is created, then we bring it back to the one-click project, and then using the compare data feature, so it might be that we look at these range already, for example, identifying any outliers. So for example, from that 92 product list, it became, I don't know, 40 product list. And now we start seeing, okay, the trend, right? So now we see a nice kind of like range of, say, 2 to 4 kilograms of CO2 per kilo of glazing in this case. And then, as I said, it might be that if it's at early stage, so we are going for the average, say, so in this case, it might look something like 3.3, or if you click next, so it might be that we are actually looking for a low carbon product. So if we already have the specification for one product, then at least with this we can compare, hey, there's a whole range of products in the bottom end that you can pick from, and these are the specs, right? It could be that they were done with, I don't know, more efficient furnaces. We were talking with a manufacturer last week, a glazing manufacturer, and he was saying that, for example, his furnaces had been refurbished very recently, and that's what drove the efficiencies in the energy, and that's why their products were typically lower in carbon, plus amount of color and so on. Right, so at the end we would end up with these nice kind of like carbon rates for each of the components. In this case, for example, for the double glaze unit, we went with the average of 3.3, and that's how we define, say, the embodied carbon of this facade in this case. And I thought we would end at least this part of the presentation, just discussing on why we need more EPDs. So if we go on to the next one, so so starting first with what I think of the problem with localization. And this is again coming from the fact that for different locations, it could be that we have more or less EPDs. So in locations where we don't have a lot of EPDs, then we have to either bring a lot of EPDs from other locations, so say Europe or North America or regions where we do have a lot of EPDs, and then we localize them again with the use of the tool. But then it might be that this does not represent the actual industry in that particular location. It might be that in this particular location they do have loads of import, so we shouldn't really be localizing it to the grid of that, to the energy grid of that particular country. Or it could be that even when we localize it, it's basically just doing that. It converts the energy intensity into whatever EUI intensity of that particular country is, but it might be that it's coming up higher and your product could actually be lower, and that's just because we don't have data for that particular product in that particular location. So I would say that is a big incentive, I would say, on why we would need more EPDs for, more locations, so that we can create the whole picture of different regions. The next one, right, so It could be that, again, by doing the localization, we are not really representing the right technology or the right R&D. So say that, for example, you as a manufacturer, you invested money and years into developing this really innovative technology and research and development. But then again, if it's not in an EPD and we don't have it in our database, then we can't see you. So that's why we really do need EPD, so that we can keep up with, the innovations that are coming up every time. And then lastly, to get the carbon benchmarks right. So if you think about it, when for different regions, so we all have standards and codes and regulations, and basically driven by carbon benchmarks, at least in the carbon space. And then these carbon benchmarks are developed either using a top-down approach created by, carbon limits and carbon budgets, or from a bottom-up approach. And that means using industry data, right? So building these carbon benchmarks from the bottom. So say by using EPDs, carbon data points, carbon databases, etc. So if we don't have enough, so it might be that we are not painting the right picture. And then as those escalate to create carbon benchmarks, so you can see the importance on why we need to get the right, as many EPDs as we can, so that then we can create a nice carbon database, so that then we can create those carbon benchmarks. Yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Cinthia. That was really, really interesting. I mean, I have questions. I'm very, very certain Arturs has some questions as well, because it's a different thing to talk about the benefits of actually having EPDs and kind of like widening this carbon transparency that is needed to decarbonize the built environment, and talk and explain manufacturers why we need more data about, as you said, location specific data is something very, very important, and we don't really talk enough about this. So it's really great to hear this from you as well, because it's part of your selection process, and it's what really makes a difference. Arturs, do you have some questions here? Would you like to ask?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it was very interesting to see some of the examples how you use One Click LCA as well in your process. I was wondering, to what extent are you using EPDs on projects, and then do you have any plans to expand this in future?
Right. So yeah, that's a good question. So I'd say that as I said, so we are using EPDs for the early design stage when we're looking at creating this carbon range and create a picture. And then as the project progresses, so we are looking at particular EPDs like for low carbon products and specifications. So we are currently looking to standardizing our internal processes of having EPDs, EPD databases, to understand the carbon context in different locations. So yeah, I would say that we're definitely planning on expanding the use of EPDs in the future. I mean, as we said, like for us right now is a bottom-up approach, so meaning that we heavily rely on industry data, which is in this case EPDs.
All right. Could you go maybe in more detail? How do you handle the challenges of actually creating the accurate benchmarks for, non-European projects where not enough data exists?
Yeah, that was kind of like what I was trying to get to in the last slide. So yeah, it's challenging because when we don't have enough information, so say for example in Middle East projects where we don't have a big range of EPDs. So then, I mean, currently what we do is, well, first of all, we try to do as much research as we can on what the current, what the actual industry is. So for example, let's talk about glazing because that's what I'm working on right now. So trying to understand a bit better, okay, well, where do glazing come from, and is it usually manufactured locally, or do they have loads of imports? Because if that's the case, then okay, we can use EPDs from other locations, obviously again representing what the industry is actually doing. And if not, then okay, then we can localize some of those products. But then again, it's trying to understand first what the current situation is in that particular location. But then again, as I was saying, so some of the challenges are that either we end up localizing these products, and then these products, it might be that they were done using different technologies, so different processes, different fuel types, even for example, the distances of A2, right? So for example, where they extracted their silica or their sand or things like that. So even those things are, I mean, you can localize it, and that's as much as you can get, but obviously you're never going to actually reflect what's actually going on in that particular location. So yeah, those are some of the challenges that sometimes we come up with numbers that are much higher, sometimes that are much lower than what an actual EPD from that location is. But then again, a sample of a couple of EPDs is not a big enough sample. So then that's when we have those discrepancies and those gaps.
All right. Is there anything beyond just the carbon emission data that you're looking for when you're looking for sustainable products?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as I said, I'm looking a lot into circularity. So yeah, definitely. Typically in EPDs, you will find A1 to A3 emissions, right? But if there are EPDs that can tell us a bit more on the end of life scenarios and what they would do with them, or how to recycle them, or anything that could give us a bit more insights on the circularity of a product, then yeah, that's a big plus. Because at the end of the day, I mean, we don't want to just have carbon tunnel vision, right? So we want to look at all the impacts of these product within its life cycle. Yeah, I would say that definitely that's something that we look into as well, not just carbon.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Cinthia. I mean, we've talked about this before when we were preparing for this, and it is a very fascinating discussion when you come to think about there's a level that EPD covers of transparency when it comes to a product's environmental footprint, environmental profile, let's call it, and then you have this, and then you have nothing. So I think I agree with Arturs on this one, and I think you agreed on our discussion as well, that having an EPD is kind of like a very important step into providing the sort of transparency that we need, because yes, we see an increase of EPDs, especially in European markets. In the US now, they're really investing on creating more and more EPDs, especially in carbon-intensive materials like concrete, steel that you mentioned. But we don't see this data also from other parts of the world. And as you know better than anyone else, the biggest building projects now happen in places like Saudi Arabia, UAE. It's the Middle East that is really creating these huge projects where carbon transparency really matters. So that's why localization and like region-specific data are really important to gather. And the more data we have as well, we add in a database, and then AC professional specifiers like yourself, that you can look through this data and kind of feel the best option. But if I'm a manufacturer and I have a really good product, and I am based in I don't know, in Vietnam, and I have no public record of what this profile is, I'm kind of missing out in a really big market specifically. So it's not just a matter of reducing carbon targets globally, which is kind of a race we're like running against time now, but it's also about making your good product visible to the world. So thank you for that. And I thought also maybe we can, since we have Arturs here and he's an EPD expert, we can ask a little bit more about what's the difference between an EPD and an LCA, because maybe some people in our audience don't really know. We talk about EPDs and LCA, life cycle assessment and environmental product declaration, but maybe Arturs, you can give us a little bit of a definition and difference between these two.
Sure. Yeah, I think these are used somewhat interchangeably at times, but they mean slightly different things. So the life cycle assessment, LCA, is the study itself. So this is where you model your raw materials, your processes, end-of-life scenarios, as well as maybe the use phase scenarios. Basically calculate all the environmental impacts, resource use, output flows, and all the detailed sort of calculations of the environmental performance of your product. Then the EPD is a document that supports and communicates this LCA study to your your customers and consumers in a transparent and easy to understand way. I think Cinthia touched upon the units being one of the problems. So the goal is that EPD communicates this information in a comparable way, understandable way. You understand the different technical specifications, the technical performance of these products as well. And in most cases, these EPDs are third-party verified, which means that they're reliable. An independent verifier has looked at the data, looked at the LCA, and confirmed that everything is done correctly. Yeah.
Thank you. So yes, so an EPD, we're kind of also, because we talk about EPD data and all, it's important also to note that a third-party verified EPD means that someone like a third party has looked at the data and verified it, and it really can, so then when Cinthia comes to the EPDs, she can tell that, okay, this is a verified EPD. I know that this data is accurate and correct, and that, I can trust this data to go on with my calculations. All right, that was really interesting. Yeah, and then Cinthia touched upon this, why in more and more companies we see them now publishing more EPDs in terms of carbon regulation and everything. Why do you see this happening more and more, Arturs? Do you have an insight on this?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is driven by regulation in the end. Like there are some markets where EPDs or at least some kind of environmental performance is mandatory. Not maybe in all projects, but in like limited type of projects or size of projects. So in the end, if you want to compete, if you want to differentiate your products, it's another tool also for your marketing organization to show that your products are better. So I think it's driven a lot by the regulatory requirements, market demand, and I think in general the drive for sustainability.
Thank you, Arturs. Yes, exactly. There's more and more regulations. We're not going to go into this. This is a whole different webinar that maybe we need to do about all the different regulations that are beginning to mandate. LCA data is already mandatory in many places, but now EPDs as well. But this is why we had Cinthia offer, because she's providing this angle of like an AC professional who is actually working with EPDs, because we are in the side of creating them, and then Cinthia is using it. So that's why thank you very much for taking this time and kind of like taking us through the material selection process. So now when we talk about materials in the construction value chain, because it's it's the beginning, it's it's where everything begins. It's where we can really conserve a lot in the emissions that are going to come later. So we talk about embodied carbon, about the carbon that is released during the first phases, creation, from raw material, transportation to the construction sites. But then that is not the end. Right, materials play a big important role also to maybe the operational emissions that are going to come later. Cinthia, do you have like discuss this a little bit more?
Yeah, so I think, yeah, that's a good question. I think when thinking of the decarbonization of the built environment, we shouldn't really just be focusing on, upfront carbon and okay, at the end of the construction, and that's it. We really should also be thinking about what we're putting in our building that will need to be replaced and how often. So I would say that if we are choosing low carbon products from the get-go, then that kind of like sets the foundation for, a decarbonized built environment in the future as well. Obviously, longevity, has a big an important place there as well. But if these are already low carbon products that have long lifespans, then yeah, that's definitely going to aid in the decarbonization of the built environment at the end as well.
All right, thank you very much, Cinthia. Yes, and this is why we're doing this. Also, we're talking about materials and material selection. And I am gonna now share my screen again. Bear with me. and kind of talk a little bit about also this tool that is about EPDs. We have tools that create and help you at One Click LCA create EPDs, third-party verified. And then today we want to also talk to you a little bit more about and latest tool that we have that is giving you insights about your EPDs, since we're talking about EPDs and what also AC professionals are looking at. We have this tool that is called an EPD Usage Analytics, and it's a tool that helps you kind of track, monitor, and analyze the performance of your EPD. You can see product usage statistics, including EPD selection frequency. You can filter this by country, category, and the project type that your EPD is used. You can identify through this platform the top products and top performing categories as well, and also those EPDs that you have that are nearing expiration, because EPDs have third-party verified EPDs usually have 5 years of and then they need to be renewed. And then you can also see how often your EPDs are chosen for products, like in Cinthia Sodas. You can add it in your LCA project, or you can download it to create a report. So through this tool, you can also see how often your EPDs are used. This practically helps you make data-driven decisions and to refine your product strategy to see which product is performing best in which market, and really see that if there's need for more EPDs in a specific category or in a specific market. So I think it's a very, very useful tool for manufacturers to really drill down on the specifics and improve their strategy and see the impact of their EPDs as well. And now I'm gonna turn this to Arturs, and he can perform a very short demo for us and show the tool a little bit in action.
All right, I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
All right, perfect. So then this is the landing page of One Click LCA, for those who are not familiar. On the top navigation bar, we have analytics, and under that we have EPD Usage Analytics. So maybe before we jump into the actual features, how we populate this data is that as a manufacturer, you have EPDs in a lot of different program operators. So you publish maybe with International EPD System, you publish with EPD Hub or any of the other program operators. One Click LCA then integrates all this data. So our database contains EPDs from all program operators. And then we have users like Cinthia and other building LCA experts who use those EPDs. Every time these EPDs are used, then we track this kind of usage statistics. So this is a view that you will see as a manufacturer. So here you can see for all your products that are in One Click LCA database, the usage. We show it in 3 dimensions. One is the when the EPD is viewed. So this is every time a data card is opened. So somebody looks at your EPD in detail. Then the second dimension is when it's added to the project. So somebody has opened it, selected that EPD and added it to their building LCA calculation. And then the third dimension is EPDs used in reports. So this is every time a final report, the detailed report of a building LCA is generated. If the product is part of this report, then this will be counted for the reported data. Here on the top, you can see overview of all your products. I think it's nicest to look at it sort of in a 12-month time frame. So for example, for September, we can see that for this manufacturer, there has been 18,666 views of their EPDs. Here we're using our generic data, so the data is a bit high, but anyway, that's the main idea. So at the top, you can see the overview. Then if we scroll lower, you can see the top categories. These are based on sort of product categories that you have EPDs for. I suppose for most manufacturers, there won't be that many, but there could be like, let's say 3 different types of concretes that you produce. And then you can change again the dimension based on which we're displaying it, and you can go to see all your categories, which then shows you a detailed view for all the different product categories in One Click LCA. If we go back, then here on the right side, you can see individual products. So each individual EPD and how it's performing. So here, for example, we see a ready-mix concrete. You can see that it has been viewed 416 times in last month. You can change it and then see, for example, the added to project data. And again, pressing See All goes into a long list of all your EPDs. Then I think also very interesting data is usage by project type. So what kind of projects are your products being used in? So are these office buildings, apartment buildings, warehouses? It can maybe identify your target audience or where maybe you have some gaps. Same goes for the project stage. Depending if the building LCA where the product is used, if it's a concept design or a technical design or already construction, then we capture this information and display it to you. So maybe it's normal if your products are selected in the construction phase, but you could target the architect type users more if your products are not being selected in the concept design, for example. Then next expiring products. This is something to help you identify where you might need to update your EPDs. Like it's hard to actually oversee all your EPDs if you publish, especially in multiple different program operators. This allows one place where you see all your EPDs and when are they going to expire, and then you can take the action to renew those EPDs. And then finally, the last style is about usage by country. So this identifies in which regions your products are used mostly. Yeah. And then maybe one more thing to show is that if we go into the detailed view, you are able to also see particular product usage. So you can select this one product. Well, this was not maybe the best selection. I select something that has data. So for example, this shows you the usage data for this particular EPD. So you can really go into the granular data of each individual product. And what is very interesting, I think, for manufacturers is also that you can see the recent usage down to even the users that use this. Of course, not the individuals, but the companies rather who use your products and in what type of projects they have been used, including the size of the project, although the size is not exact so that the projects can't be identified specifically. Yeah, I think that's it for a short demo.
Thank you, Arturs. This is really interesting, I think. Cinthia, what did you think?
Yeah, I was mute. Yeah, I think it seems like a very, very interesting tool, and I'm sure it's going to be super useful for manufacturers, especially. I mean, I think keeping track of how your EPDs are used is also a great incentive to, you know, keep producing more and updating them. I mean, as you said, like these have an expiry date, so obviously they need to be kept up to date so that we can continue to use them. So yeah, I think it's going to be a great tool for manufacturers.
Thank you, Cinthia. Thank you very much. All right. And so we're at this stage where we talked a little bit about the EPD Usage Analytics. We have our software demo. And now I'm just going to talk 1 minute about One Click LCA in case you don't know our platform very much. One Click LCA is an end-to-end leading sustainability platform for construction and manufacturing. It is used in over 170 countries. We comply with over 80 standards and regulations, and with it you can automate lifecycle assessment and environmental product declarations to calculate and reduce the emissions of your buildings, infrastructure projects, and products and materials. So very soon now you will see a poll to appear on your screen, and we will ask you if you would like One Click LCA expert to contact you for a demo and to check out our solutions, or if you would like a more detailed demo of our EPD Usage Analytics tool. So if you do, please click yes on the poll that you now see appear on your screen. And thank you very much for joining and for listening to this really interesting and insightful discussion. If you need more information about One Click LCA, you can always reach out and contact us at www.oneclicklca.com. Anyway, I just really want to extend a warm thank you to Cinthia for joining us. I think it was really, really interesting to have this angle, this point of view, because we cannot keep talking in silos when we talk about decarbonizing the construction industry. We need to have feedback from both sides, from the manufacturing to construction professionals, to understand where we have what's the needs, where we have the gap, and how we can move forward. So really thank you, Cinthia, for being with us today.
No, thanks for having me. I think it was great to be part of this discussion. Thank you.
And Arturs, thank you for joining. I'm very sure that it was really exciting and interesting for you, since working on EPDs and getting the feedback from the other side.
Yeah, thank you. It was great to hear actually detailed examples of how our tools are used. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. Have a good day or good night from wherever you're joining, and we'll see you in the next webinar. Bye.